But here's a question, though. Here's a question. Let's say a possibility of a civil war happens. Where would one want to live?
You know, where I live just seems great right now. Meteorologically, wind patterns. I mean, everything looks pretty good out there. And by the way, it's so poor, no one would ever want to go in and take it. Where I used to live in the suburbs of D.C., everyone had lots of money. No one had any time. You know what I mean? No one had any time for you. You know, you ask someone, everyone goes like that, you know. Where I now live, no one has any money, but everyone has lots of time. You go and ask your neighbor, they're not going to say, oh, yeah, well, I got this great plumber, you can call him. They'll say, I'll come over to your house right now, try to fix it for you, right? It's a very different set of values, right? We live in a country that is so split, right? Between, you know, we talk about red zone and blue zone, that's part of it, but it is just so different. You feel like you're moving into a different country, right? And then I'm talking about a 2-hour drive, you know, from the outskirts of D.C. up into the hills of West Virginia. So, you know, when I think bleakly about the internal conflict, that's what I think about. I think about these are two Americas which seem like they're like on opposite ends of the earth.
Yeah, I saw a video of a mother saying, I feel so unsafe raising my child in Florida. The state is so irresponsible. They're not allowing my child to get puberty blockers at 14 years old. And then I'm like, I mean, listen, it's turning into a point where, listen, you're going to have to go to California. That's where you're going to feel the safest. So it's going to become so tribal where if you want welfare and all that, go to California. If you want to be standing on your own 2 feet and being left alone, go to these 7 states. If you want to go start a business.
It's already doing it. The self-selection is already well underway. People are moving to places where, you know, and by the way, if you survey people about who they least want to live around, people on the other end of the political spectrum are the number one most hateful things that people want around. They care less about race, religion. They don't care about anything else so much as having someone on the other end of politics living near them. This is why it's driving this self-segregation locally. And by the way, it's also driving the whole phenomenon of the stolen election. One reason why it's easy to believe in stolen election, this didn't used to be true. You live in more and more landslide counties. You know what a landslide county is? It's a county where, 80% of everyone just votes for one candidate as opposed to the other. What that means is the typical voter, say you vote for Trump in 2020 and Biden wins, and you think, I don't know a single person who voted for Biden. I don't know anyone in my town. I don't know anyone, right? I've never seen anyone talk about Biden. It must have been stolen, right? How can it be other than that, right? America didn't used to be that way. We didn't used to be so tribal. We all knew people who voted for someone else. I remember growing up, I mean, the neighbor voted for Nixon, the other neighbor voted for Kennedy, right? And the parties weren't that different. Now it's like these total mutually exclusive worldviews, right? This is what scares me, Patrick. And they're living in different communities. They're living in different counties. I don't know if that doesn't worry you. It worries me. But I see where this is going.
It worries you because of what? Why does it worry you?
It worries me because I think this can only have one end has to come out on top. You know, they either have to separate each other, but I don't see any example in history where they peacefully separate. And I don't think either one would accede to a peaceful separation. Either they separate through violence, or they are scared straight into agreeing because we have bigger problems outside.
There's no way that's going to happen. There's no way that's going to happen. There's no way that's going to happen. You're going to force. You've read Atlas Shrugged, right? And what eventually happens, where the idea is, the John Galts of the world just kind of want to go live together, right? Where Peter Thiel, did you follow the story about Peter Thiel building his own city on the middle of the water in San Francisco, and how
the water world.
The water, yeah. Have you followed this, Rob, or no? Type in Peter Thiel building his own city. It's going to get to a point where one's going to be like, look, you guys, I can't raise my kids around what you believe in. You feel like you're comfortable walking around outside doing all this stuff? Yeah, I can't be there with you guys. No, and you can't change me. And you think that's normal. I can't change you. You live there. More power to you. The biggest challenge that I notice right now is common sense values and principles are being questioned. And we're questioning what, even this guy, Jonathan Haidt, right? He's talking about in the interview, the anxious generation guy who wrote this book. And he says, which types of parents, Rob, do you have that clip I sent you a long time ago about Jonathan Haidt, where he's being asked by the interviewer, which ideology raises less anxious kids? Okay.
Yeah.
Conservative families. I don't know if you've seen this or not.
Yeah, I have. It's girls with progressive parents who are the most effed up. Right?
Yeah.
At the top. And
But then he gets asked the questions. He gets asked the question, and he's asked the question saying, so conservatives raise more peaceful kids, less anxiety, all this stuff. Then the interviewer asks him and says, if you, based on your research, see that philosophy and ideology raises better kids, why don't you change your philosophies to that? He says, I can't do that. I'm from academia. Now, you've never seen this?
No. Wait, he belongs to some sort of guild which dictates
now if you've never seen it, I have to show it to you. I mean, there's no way I can now not show it to you.
Because he's from academia?
You've never seen, Rob, I send it to you in text. How do you spell his last name?
Haidt.
No, you got to see this now. No, this is not it, Rob. He's actually being interviewed by this. No, that's not it. I'll find it to you and send it to you. So the part I'm asking about, even if a guy like that is sitting there doing the research, he's not from the political side. He's on the progressive side. He's on the left. And he also says those values and principles are better to raise a society. What other proof do you need to know that we are gaslighting and confusing the hell out of our kids? So for me to go back to what you're saying, when you say, either one side has to force or the other side has to agree, I think it's going to end up being a division between the two. And I think eventually families have to sit there. I mean, look, my parents raised me where? I was born in Iran. They lived in Iran their entire lives. My mom speaks Armenian, Assyrian, Turkish, and Farsi, okay? My dad speaks Assyrian, Armenian, and Farsi. They've lived there for 40-something years. You mean to tell me last minute they decide to leave Iran to go to Germany, causes them to get their second divorce against each other, and then they come out here, my dad loses everything he had? Why did they leave? Why did they leave? Because they simply didn't see the values and principles of Iran as a place they want to raise kids. What's the difference with what's going on today? So I think the more and more you're saying, your concern is that back in the days, more and more people agreed. It is such radical division right now between the two sides, where at least back in the days, a John F. Kennedy and a Nixon wasn't radically that wide.
No, but this is the cycle, right? In other words, after a war, we do have that coming together of all the parties. But if you go back to America in the 1850s, about half of the congressmen were armed going into the House, right? I mean, it was a free-for-all. It was incredibly violent between the increasing regionalism of the United States, right? South versus North. Everyone knew that they were two nations kind of coming to pieces, right? The churches had all divided, right? The Baptists had divided, the Methodists had divided, North and South, everything had divided. But this has happened before, Patrick, is what I'm trying to say. And that's what I try to do. I try to bring the lens of history. Because if we just sit here and thinking, oh my God, this has never happened before, what are we going to do? We're blind.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
We need to use history.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. If somebody in your family voted for Nixon versus Kennedy, okay, early 60s, whatever, pick and choose.
Yeah.
What was the difference between the values? What was the biggest dramatic difference on why a person voted for Kennedy versus Nixon?
It's how warmly you felt about the communists and the New Dealers during the war and during the Great Depression. So those kinds of things were still in the air. Nixon was more supportive of the McCarthy era, the movement to root out all the communists during the 1950s. Kennedy was more on the, a little bit more lenient. However, they had so much in common, right? I mean, they both believed in a strong America. They both believed in arming. They both believed in ICBMs. They both believed in standing up to the Soviet Union. I could go down all the things they had in common, right? Mm-hmm. But that's my point. Sure, there were differences, and people talked about them, a little bit of animosity among some of the old leftists, right? But it was completely unlike today, right? That's what when I talked earlier about these mutually irreconcilable. There's a great essay written in 1940. Carl Becker is a great intellectual historian. He wrote a book called the Heavenly City of the 18th Century Philosophers, one of my all-time favorites. Anyway, a great intellectual historian. He wrote a book near the end of his life in 1940. This is when the world was going to hell, right? Everyone could see it. I mean, how many democracies had fallen in Europe to the fascists? Stalin was going great. I mean, it was a terrible time in the world. It was before Pearl Harbor. We could all see what was going. And he wrote a very dark essay on democracy. And he said something I think really interesting. He said, and I think this gets to your point. He said, democracies work best when there isn't much to talk about. Meaning, democracies work best when the only thing you're talking about with your neighbors is the size of the sidewalks and what kind of gauge sewer line to put in, and, just coordination issues.
That's my point.
You agree, but isn't that interesting?
No,
But he made the point, he said, when people disagree on fundamental values, again, he said this in 1940.
Yeah.
He said, democracy can't work because no one's going to change your entire life because you won only 49% of the vote, right? You see what I mean?
In these uncertain times, if there's anything we need people to believe the future looks bright. So if you've heard about me saying this mission to you, we're on a mission to get 1 million people to wear this gear, and this is what we're doing. If you buy one of these hats, there's a category of buying one hat, getting the second one free. If you haven't yet worn this gear publicly, go ahead and test it out. Buy some of the gear, wear it in public, and see how many people will stop by and say, you also watch Valuetainment? You also follow PBD Podcast? I do too. Place your order. Go to vtmerch.com, click on the link above or below, place your order, and represent the VT and the PBD Podcast gear.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.